In the heart of the Bitterroot Mountains, where the pines whispered secrets older than time and the wind carried the scent of frost and wild thyme, a creature stirred in the underbrush. It was no ordinary beast, not a deer with its delicate legs, nor a bear with its lumbering might. This was a wolf, a she-wolf, named Kale by the ancient tongues of the forest, her fur a tapestry of silver and shadow, her eyes like twin moons caught in a storm. She was a loner, cast out from her pack after a brutal winter when food was scarce and trust scarcer still. Her ribs pressed against her skin, a stark reminder of hunger's cruel grip, and her paws bled from endless miles over jagged stone. Yet Kale was no stranger to survival. She thrived in the wild's merciless embrace, her heart a furnace of defiance. The valley below was a patchwork of meadows and streams, cradling a small homestead where smoke curled lazily from a chimney. It was here, in the fading light of a late autumn dusk, that Kale's fate took its first staggering turn. 3 pups, barely weaned, their fur a chaotic blend of brown and gold, tumbled out of a weathered barn. They were mutts, a mix of shepherd and something wilder, raised by a grizzled farmer named Amos who loved them fiercely but let them roam free. The pups, named Juniper, Sage, and Clover by Amos's daughter, Lila, were a whirlwind of yips and boundless curiosity. Their world was one of muddy paws, stolen scraps, and the joy of chasing their own tails under the vast Montana sky. Kale, hidden in the tall grass, watched them with a predator's caution. Her stomach growled, a low rumble that echoed the distant thunder. The homestead's chickens clucked in their coop, a temptation she'd stalked for days. But these pups, they were no threat, yet they intrigued her. Their movements were clumsy, their barks more playful than menacing. She'd seen dogs before, domesticated shadows of her kind, but these 3 carried a spark of something untamed. Juniper, the boldest, spotted her first. His ears perked, his tail wagged like a metronome, and he bounded toward her with a fearless grin. Sage and Clover followed, their tiny legs churning the earth, their eyes wide with wonder rather than fear. Kale froze. Instinct screamed to snarl, to bare her fangs and send them scattering. But something stayed her, a flicker of memory, perhaps, of her own littermates long lost to the wild's cruelty. Juniper skidded to a stop mere feet away, dropping into a playful bow, his tongue lolling out. "Play," he seemed to say, though Kale knew no words. Sage nipped at her brother's ear, and Clover, the smallest, yipped and rolled onto her back, paws flailing. Kale's hackles lowered, her confusion a sharp blade against her hunger. These were no wolves, yet they treated her as one of their own, not with fear, but with the reckless trust of youth. The days that followed were a blur of strangeness. Kale lingered near the homestead, drawn by the pups' relentless invitations. They chased her through the meadows, tumbling over roots and splashing through icy streams. Juniper would leap at her, pretending to wrestle, while Sage nipped at her heels, urging her to run faster. Clover, ever the dreamer, would flop beside her when the games ended, her warm body pressed against Kale's side as if they'd known each other forever. To Kale, it was bewildering. She was a hunter, a ghost of the wild. Yet these pups saw her not as a threat, but as a friend. They brought her scraps from Amos's table, bits of bread, a half-gnawed bone, left at the edge of the woods as offerings. Kale ate, her pride warring with her hunger, and each bite bound her closer to this strange new world. Lila, a girl of 16 with hair like spun copper and eyes that saw too much, noticed the pup's new companion. From the porch, she watched Kale's shadow slip through the trees, her heart a tangle of awe and fear. Amos, a man carved from the same rugged stone as the mountains, warned her to keep her distance. "Wolves ain't dogs, Lila," he'd say, his voice rough as gravel. They got no loyalty but to their own. Yet Lila saw something in Kale's eyes, a spark of longing, a mirror of her own restless spirit. She began leaving food out herself, not scraps but proper meals. Chunks of venison, a bowl of stew. Kale, wary but starving, crept closer each night, her trust a fragile thread spun from necessity. Winter loomed, its breath cold and unforgiving. The pups grew bolder, their games spilling deeper into the forest. Kale, now a reluctant guardian, followed. She taught them to track, her nose guiding theirs to the faint scent of a hare. She showed them how to move silently, her paws a whisper against the earth. In return, they taught her joy, the kind that came from a belly full of laughter, not just meat. But the wild was no place for innocence. One evening, as the pups romped near a frozen creek, a shadow moved in the pines. Not Kale's shadow, but another. A cougar, its eyes like burning coals, its body a taut coil of hunger. It had been watching, waiting, drawn by the pups' careless noise. Kale sensed it before the pups did. Her hackles rose, a low growl vibrating in her chest. Juniper, oblivious, chased a leaf, while Sage and Clover wrestled in the snow. The cougar crouched, its muscles rippling under tawny fur. Time slowed, the world narrowing to the pulse of danger. Kale's instincts roared. Run, fight, survive. But something new stirred within her. These pups, these foolish, trusting creatures, had woven themselves into her soul. She could not abandon them. With a snarl that split the dusk, Kale launched herself at the cougar, her body a silver blur against the snow. The fight was brutal, a clash of fang and claw. Kale was smaller, leaner, but her ferocity burned brighter than the cougar's hunger. She dodged its swipes, her teeth finding its shoulder, its flank. Blood stained the snow, both hers and the cougar's. The pups, frozen in terror, watched as their wild protector battled for their lives. Juniper, ever brave, barked and lunged, his tiny teeth snapping at air. Sage and Clover huddled together, their whimpers a desperate chorus. Kale fought on, her strength waning, her vision blurring. The cougar's claws raked her side, a searing pain that threatened to drag her into darkness. Then, a crack split the air, a rifle's report. Amos stood at the forest's edge, his face grim, his gun still smoking. The cougar yowled, blood blooming on its haunch, and fled into the shadows. Kale collapsed, her breath ragged, her fur matted with blood. The pups rushed to her, their warmth a faint anchor against the cold creeping into her bones. Lila ran from the homestead, her voice breaking as she called Kale's name. Amos knelt beside the wolf, his hands steady but his eyes troubled. "Damn fool creature," he muttered, but there was no malice in it. He saw what Lila saw, a wild heart that had chosen to protect, to love, against all its instincts. Kale's eyes fluttered, the world a haze of pain and warmth. The pups pressed close, their noses nudging her, their whines a plea for her to stay. Lila's hands, gentle but firm, pressed a cloth to Kale's wounds. Amos carried her to the barn, a place of hay and safety, far from the wild's cruel embrace. As night fell, the stars burned cold above, and Kale drifted into a restless sleep, her fate hanging on a knife's edge. The pups curled beside her, their tiny bodies a fragile promise of something new, a bond forged not by blood, but by choice. The barn smelled of hay and old leather, a sanctuary of warmth against the bitterroot's biting cold. Kale lay on a bed of straw, her silver fur matted with dried blood, her breathing shallow but stubborn. The pups, Juniper, Sage, and Clover, never strayed far. Juniper paced, his tail flicking like a metronome, his eyes fixed on Kale as if his will alone could tether her to life. Sage gnawed a stick, her nervous energy a quiet storm, while Clover curled against Kale's side, her tiny body a pulse of warmth. Lila knelt nearby, her hands stained with salve and worry, her copper hair falling in tangles as she whispered words Kale couldn't hear but somehow felt. Amos stood at the barn door, his silhouette framed by the dawn's pale light, his rifle propped against the wall. He didn't trust the wolf, not entirely, but he trusted Lila's heart, and that was enough for now. Days bled into nights, each one a battle Kale fought in silence. The cougar's claws had carved deep, but her spirit was deeper still. Lila tended her wounds with a skill learned from years of patching up livestock, her hands steady despite the fear that gnawed her insides. She sang softly as she worked, old folk tunes about rivers and lost loves, and the pups listened, their ears twitching, as if the music wove a spell to keep Kale anchored. Juniper brought her treasures, a chewed boot, a pine cone, laying them at her side like offerings to a wild goddess. Sage, ever practical, dragged a tattered blanket over Kale's shivering form. Clover simply stayed, her warmth a constant reminder of why Kale had fought at all. By the 7th day, Kale's eyes burned brighter, her strength a slow ember rekindling. She rose, unsteady, her legs trembling like a newborn foal's. The pups yipped in delight, tumbling over each other to greet her, their joy a chaotic symphony. Lila laughed, tears streaking her face, and even Amos's weathered features softened, though he hid it behind a gruff cough. Kale, still weak, felt something shift within her, a crack in the armor of her solitude. The wild called, its voice a howl in her blood, but the barn, the pups, Lila's gentle hands. They sang a different song, one she didn't yet understand. Winter tightened its grip, snow burying the valley in a blanket of white. Kale, now stronger, roamed the homestead's edges, her instincts torn between the forest's pull and the pups' relentless devotion. They followed her everywhere, their games evolving into something more, a pack, however unlikely. Juniper mimicked her low crouch, his eyes gleaming with pride when he stalked a rabbit. Sage learned to listen, her ears pricking at sounds even Kale missed. Clover, the dreamer, seemed to sense Kale's thoughts, her gaze meeting the wolf's in moments of quiet understanding. They were no longer just pups. They were hers, and she was theirs, a bond forged in blood and choice. But the wild does not forgive, nor does it forget. Rumors spread through the valley, carried by trappers and hunters who gathered at the general store. A wolf, they said, had been seen near Amos's land. A silver ghost, too bold, too close. Some spoke of a pack, others of a lone predator, but all agreed, a wolf among dogs was trouble. Old grudges stirred, memories of lost livestock and hard winters. A man named Harlan, a hunter with a scar across his cheek and a heart as cold as the ice on the creek, saw opportunity. He'd killed wolves before, their pelts adorning his cabin walls. Kale's silver fur, he reckoned, would fetch a fine price. One moonless night, Harlan crept toward the homestead, his rifle loaded with silver-tipped bullets, his breath steaming in the frigid air. Kale sensed him first, her hackles rising as she stood guard over the sleeping pups. The barn was quiet, save for Amos's snores and Lila's soft breathing in the loft. Kale's instincts screamed, run, vanish into the night, but the pup's warmth anchored her. She slipped into the shadows, her movements a whisper, and tracked Harlan through the snow. He was skilled, his steps light, but Kale was a ghost born of the wild. She circled him, her eyes glowing in the dark, her growl a low warning. Harlan froze, his finger on the trigger, but Kale was faster. She lunged, not for his throat but for his arm, her teeth sinking into flesh. He screamed, the rifle falling, its shot splitting the night sky. The homestead awoke. Amos bursting from the house, Lila scrambling down from the loft, the pups barking in a frenzy. Harlan stumbled back, blood dripping into the snow, his eyes wide with fear and fury. "Demon wolf!" he spat, clutching his wounded arm. Amos raised his rifle, but Lila's cry stopped him. "She saved us, Pa!" she shouted, her voice raw. "She's family." Kale stood between Harlan and the pups, her body a shield, her gaze unwavering. Amos lowered his gun, his jaw tight. Harlan fled, his curses fading into the night, but the danger lingered. Word would spread, and others would come, hunters, neighbors, men who saw only a wolf, not the heart that beat within her. Lila knelt beside Kale, her hands trembling as she checked for wounds. The pups pressed close, their whines a plea for safety. Amos, for the first time, looked at Kale not as a beast, but as a guardian. "Reckon you've earned your place," he muttered, his voice barely audible over the wind. The next morning, Kale led the pups into the forest, her steps purposeful. Lila followed at a distance, her heart heavy with a truth she couldn't name. Kale stopped at a clearing, the same one where she'd fought the cougar. She turned to the pups, her eyes fierce but tender. Juniper tilted his head, sensing the shift. Sage pawed the ground, restless. Clover whined, her small body trembling. Kale nudged each one, her nose brushing their fur, a farewell woven in touch. Then, with a final glance at Lila, she vanished into the pines, her silver form swallowed by the wild. Lila stood frozen, tears freezing on her cheeks. The pups howled, their voices a chorus of loss that echoed through the valley. Amos found her there, his hand heavy on her shoulder. "She's where she belongs," he said, but his voice cracked. The pups never forgot her. They grew strong, their games tinged with the lessons Kale had taught them. Lila watched the forest, hoping for a glimpse of silver, but Kale was a ghost again, her heart torn between two worlds. Years later, when the pups were old and gray, a story spread through the valley. Hunters spoke of a silver wolf, a legend who roamed the Bitterroot, protecting lost travelers and guiding stray dogs home. Some swore they saw her with 3 shadows at her side. Not wolves, but dogs, their bond unbroken by time or distance. Lila, now a woman with a daughter of her own, smiled when she heard the tale. She named her child Kale, and every night, she told her of a wolf who loved like a dog, and pups who loved like a pack. Their story a staggering thread in the wild's endless tapestry.